This is outrageous. I demand to speak to the manager. This insolence will not stand. Karen's voice, shrill and piercing, cut through the quiet suburban morning like a siren. She stood, ramrod straight, in the middle of her perfectly manicured lawn, her face contorted with fury, pointing an accusing finger at the house across the street. Her neighbor, Marcus, a kind-faced man with salt and pepper hair, leaned against his mailbox, bewildered. Karen, he started cautiously. What seems to be the problem? Don't you Karen me, she spat. It's bad enough your nephew moves in and disrupts the peace. But now I can't even enjoy my morning coffee because my internet is gone. Marcus frowned, genuinely confused. I'm sorry, Karen. I don't understand. What does my nephew have to do with your internet? Don't play dumb with me, Karen shrieked, her voice reaching new octaves. He's obviously changed the Wi-Fi password. That's the thanks I get for letting you freeloaders use it all these years. The moment my back is turned, you cut me off. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Freeloaders? Karen, you've never shared your Wi-Fi. You made that very clear when I first moved in and asked. Karen sputtered, momentarily thrown by his words. But she recovered quickly, her anger morphing into righteous indignation. Well, maybe I was being nice. Maybe I didn't want to be rude like some people. Marcus opened his mouth to reply, but before he could utter a word, Karen whipped around, a triumphant glint in her eyes. Wait a minute, she muttered, squinting at something behind him. What is that? Her gaze was fixed on a small, white van parked discreetly down the street. On its side, barely visible under the morning sun, was a logo. Fiber optic, high-speed internet installation. The color drained from Karen's face faster than a dropped ice cream cone on a hot summer day. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her like a poorly built sandcastle. Marcus, seeing the shift in her demeanor, took the opportunity to speak. As I was saying, Karen, he said slowly, I haven't been using your Wi-Fi. In fact, I just had this new fiber optic internet installed today. He gestured towards the van, a hint of amusement in his eyes. But, Karen stammered, her voice losing its usual shrillness, replaced by a note of panic. The internet. It's been so slow lately. I assumed. She trailed off, realizing how ridiculous she must sound. A sly smile spread across Marcus's face. Slow internet? That's funny, Karen, because my nephew mentioned he was having trouble with his connection speed this morning. Seems like someone was hogging all the bandwidth. He didn't have to elaborate further. The truth dawned on Karen, bringing with it a wave of shame. She had spent weeks complaining about the slow internet, blaming everyone but herself. She even yelled at her teenage daughter for downloading too many games. Now the reason was staring her in the face, as plain as the logo on the side of that van. Before Karen could formulate a response, the van doors slid open and a young man, not much older than 20, hopped out. He was tall and lanky, with a wide smile that revealed a set of purely white teeth. He held a clipboard in his hand and wore a bright blue vest emblazoned with the words, Fiber Optic High-Speed Internet. He looked at Marcus and gave him a cheerful wave. Morning, Mr. Davis. We're all set up here. Just need your signature on the dotted line and you'll be surfing at lightning speed. Karen felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her. It wasn't enough that she'd made a fool of herself, accusing Marcus and his nephew of stealing her Wi-Fi. Now she had to witness firsthand their easy camaraderie, the genuine warmth in their interactions. They looked like they were genuinely happy to see each other, a stark contrast to the icy silence that had settled between her and Marcus. Everything all right, Mrs. Peterson? The young man's question, polite yet laced with a hint of amusement, snapped Karen out of her self-pitying spiral. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the perfectly manicured hedges lining her yard. Instead, she forced a strained smile. "Yes, everything is just peachy," she chirped, her voice sounding unnaturally high-pitched. The young man, thankfully oblivious to her inner turmoil, turned back to Marcus. "So," he said, handing over the clipboard, "if you could just sign here, and you're all set." As Marcus signed the paperwork, the young man caught Karen's eye. He offered her a friendly nod, which she returned with a stiff smile. But before he could turn away, she blurted out, "You wouldn't happen to have any promotional offers for new customers, would you?" The young man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He glanced at Marcus, then back at Karen, a slow grin spreading across his face. He pulled a colorful flyer from his back pocket. "As a matter of fact," he said, "we do." Karen snatched the flyer from the young man's hand as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Fiber optic, huh?" she mused, scanning the flyer with feigned interest. "Sounds fancy. Expensive, I bet." "Actually," the young man chirped, "it's very competitively priced. Plus, we're offering a significant discount for the first 6 months for new customers." He launched into a well-rehearsed spiel about download speeds and bandwidth, but Karen wasn't really listening. She was too busy trying to calculate how much money she'd have to transfer from her savings to cover the cost of a new internet plan. Marcus, sensing her predicament, cleared his throat. "Don't worry about all that technical jargon, Karen," he said, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "The important thing is, this new internet is blazing fast. You'll be able to download all the knitting patterns you could ever want in the blink of an eye." Karen shot him a look that could curdle milk, but he just chuckled and winked at the young man, who was trying his best to stifle a laugh. "Well," Karen said, suddenly feeling very small, "I'll have to think about it. I'm not one to make rash decisions." She tried to sound nonchalant, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The young man, ever the professional, didn't miss a beat. "No problem, ma'am. Here's my card. Give us a call if you have any questions or decide to sign up." He handed her a business card, then turned and headed back towards the van. As he did, Karen noticed something strange. There, on the back of his vest, just above the words "Fiber Optic High-Speed Internet," was a small, embroidered name tag, and the name on the tag stopped her cold. It read, Deshaun Davis. Deshaun Davis. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Karen's mind raced, trying to reconcile the image she constructed in her head of the nephew with the reality standing before her. She had pictured a troublemaker, a hoodlum, a drain on society. Someone who fit the stereotype she unconsciously crafted in her mind. Someone who looked like, well, she couldn't even admit the thought to herself. And yet, here he was, Deshaun Davis, internet installer extraordinaire, radiating competence and kindness. A wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't just the shame of her false accusations or the embarrassment of being caught in her lie. It was the sickening realization of her own prejudice, laid bare for all to see. Marcus, oblivious to her inner turmoil, mistook her silence for indecision. "He's a good kid, my Deshaun," he said, a proud smile spreading across his face. "Just finished up his certification program. Top of his class." Deshaun, who had been loading equipment into the van, paused and offered a shy wave. "Morning, Mrs. Peterson," he repeated, his voice friendly, devoid of any resentment for her earlier outburst. Karen wanted to apologize, to explain herself, to somehow erase the last 10 minutes of her life. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt constricted, her tongue thick and useless. So instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She plastered a fake smile on her face and said, "That's nice, Marcus." Her voice sounded strained, even to her own ears. She knew she needed to say something else to salvage the situation, but her mind was a swirling vortex of shame and regret. As if sensing her distress, Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Well," he said, clapping his hands together, "I guess I'll let you get back to your coffee." He shot her a pointed look, a silent reminder of her earlier tirade. Karen mumbled a quick goodbye and scurried back towards her house, desperate to escape the weight of their gazes. She could feel Deschamps' eyes on her back, a tangible reminder of her ignorance. Every fiber of her being wanted to run inside, to lock the door and hide from the world, and the shame gnawing at her conscience. But something stopped her. A flicker of self-awareness, perhaps, or maybe the tiniest shred of decency fighting to break free from the clutches of her prejudice. Whatever it was, it gave her pause. She stopped at the edge of her porch and took a deep breath. Turning back to face Marcus and Deschamps, she knew she couldn't let this stand. Not this time. "Marcus," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Deschamps." She hesitated, her carefully constructed walls of self-preservation crumbling around her. I owe you both an apology." The words tasted like poison on her tongue, an admission of guilt she'd never dreamed of uttering. Yet, as she spoke, a strange sense of relief washed over her. Marcus, his expression unreadable, remained silent. Deschamps, however, looked up from where he was packing the last of the equipment into the van, his eyes filled with cautious curiosity. "What I said before," Karen continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "about the Wi-Fi and your nephew, it was wrong. I made a mistake, a big one." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the chirping of birds in the nearby trees. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Karen's shoulder. He seemed to be struggling with an internal battle, weighing his history with Karen against the sincerity of her apology. Deschamps, ever the peacemaker, broke the stalemate. "It's okay, Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice gentle. "Everyone makes mistakes." His words, so simple yet profound, seemed to break the tension. Marcus finally met her gaze, a flicker of something akin to forgiveness in his eyes. "Yeah, Karen," he echoed. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes." Karen felt a lump forming in her throat. Their understanding, their willingness to forgive, was both humbling and overwhelming. She had spent so long building walls, convinced that everyone was out to get her, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be shown grace. "It's just," Karen stammered, struggling to articulate the whirlwind of emotions churning inside her. "I was so convinced that, she trailed off, realizing how flimsy her justification sounded, even to her own ears. "It's okay, Mrs. Peterson," Deschamps repeated, sensing her struggle. He closed the back of the van and turned to face her fully. "How about this?" he offered, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You think about that new internet plan, and when I come back next week to check on Mr. Davis' connection, you can tell me all about it." He winked, a gesture so unexpected, so utterly disarming, that Karen couldn't help but laugh. The sound of Karen's laughter, hesitant at first but quickly gaining in strength, seemed to break the last vestiges of the awkwardness that had settled over the three of them. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that started in the belly and bubbled up, washing away the remnants of her earlier anger and shame. As her laughter subsided, she looked at Marcus and Deschamps, really looked at them, and saw not the stereotypes her mind had conjured, but two people, flawed and funny and kind. People who, despite her outburst, had offered her understanding instead of judgment. "Next week, then," she said, a newfound lightness in her voice. "Same time, same place." Deschamps grinned. "You got it, Mrs. Peterson. And hey," he added, "you can just call me Deschamps." "And I'm Marcus," Marcus chimed in, a wide smile on his face. "No need for formalities between neighbors." Karen felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that had been absent for far too long. It wasn't just the promise of faster internet or the resolution of a silly misunderstanding. It was the flicker of connection, the possibility of something new and real, and maybe even a little bit life-changing. As Deshawn climbed into his van and drove away, Karen turned to Marcus and offered a genuine smile, the first one she'd given him in years. "So," she said, "how about we start over? I'd love to hear more about this nephew of yours. He sounds like quite the rising star." And as they stood there, chatting like the neighbors they were always meant to be, Karen allowed herself a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change, to be better, to finally tear down the walls she'd so carefully erected and let a little light in.